5 things to know for Tokyo 2020. My name's Ken Hanscom, and each week I bring you the latest news and stories and all the things surrounding next summer's event in Tokyo, Japan. I'm back after a couple of weeks. I had the opportunity to attend a few sporting events here in the US, specifically the Major League Baseball, National League Championship Series, and the World Series. I'm really excited to share the latest news this week. So let's go ahead and get to number 1. The Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee announced today that specifically people that bought tickets directly from them, so Japanese residents, would be able to request refunds if they are no longer able to or do not want to attend. The refund period will be November 10th through November 30th, and the refunds will follow shortly after. Also mentioned is they mentioned the possibility that we've been talking about for some time that they may not be able to have full venues. And in the case that they are not able to have full venues, they will be issuing ticket refunds. So it's welcome news. It's very much what is expected. If you did buy a ticket from an authorized ticket reseller or ATR, those processes in terms of refunds happened a couple of months back. So this is not specifically for you, but if you are a resident in Japan or someone who purchased directly from TOCOG or the Tokyo Organizing Committee, now this is the process that you can go ahead and check out to actually request your refunds. Let's move on to number 2. For the past couple of months, I've discussed some of the countermeasures that the Tokyo Organizing Committee has been coming up with and the potential that we would see those, as well as the potential for reopening for tourism as early as April 2021. What happened this week is that we got some insight into one of the national federations, and specifically Olympic Committee, the Olympic Federation of Ireland. And what they said in there is they're looking at countermeasures that could require athletes who compete to depart anywhere between 24 and 48 hours after their competition's complete as a way to protect other athletes depending on the situation with COVID-19. That is interesting because it would potentially have an impact on specifically closing ceremony and the athletes that would be able to attend if in fact several or many federations adopt this sort of policy. It's very early, it's not certain, but it's the first glimpse and kind of transparency that we've gotten to how some of the federations, specifically Ireland, are looking at putting in place countermeasures to protect the athletes and protect the competitions in Tokyo. Let's move on to number 3. I thought this was a really interesting article, and the reason for this is very early in the pandemic, we heard stories about swimmers who were going to backyard pools, that were going to neighbors' pools, to friends' pools, able to swim. We heard the same thing about cyclists and runners and others trying to find ways to train in the pandemic. But specifically, when we look at divers, and specifically Delaney Schnell, who's a world bronze medalist, actually was 6 months between platform dives that from the 10-meter height that she had to wait for. And so during the training, as if you read the article, what it talks about is having to go with springboard and maybe some lower type dives. And even when the pools opened back up so that she could go and dive from a 10-meter height, it took several days for her to get used to and actually reacclimate to that sort of height. So I think it's a really interesting and compelling story about some of the challenges and struggles that many Olympic athletes, as they look towards Tokyo 2020 next summer, are really faced with and what they've been enduring over the past few months. So go ahead, give it a read. I think you'll enjoy it. Now let's move on to number 4. One of the most exciting moments of the opening ceremony at the Olympic Games is when the parade of athletes come in and we see all of the athletes looking to compete and looking at the opportunity to potentially win a gold medal over the next couple of weeks. And so the announcement this week is pretty much expected. It's what we've generally seen over the last few Olympics, is that the order of nations will be based on the Japanese language. And that's been consistent for the last several Olympic cycles, whether it was Portuguese in Rio, whether it was Korean in South Korea at Pyeongchang, and now specifically Japanese at Tokyo. It hasn't been without a little bit of controversy because in some cases certain nations appeared at different places in the order where they did, and based on broadcasts and other types of things, there was some potential discussions about whether or not they would move some. So in terms of this being set for next summer for the opening ceremony, the parade of athletes will be based on the order of their nation based on the Japanese language. Now let's move on to number 5. This news is in the world of Olympic sprinting, and specifically world champion Christian Coleman of the United States his ban for 2 years was upheld for basically for repeated drug testing violations and missing availability windows. This was pretty much expected. This was initially announced in June, and through the appeals process, it was made final that Christian Coleman will be banned for 2 years and will miss next summer's 100-meter finals, which does open up the race and open up some finals, and it should be an event that doesn't necessarily have a huge favorite like Christian would have been had he been able to compete. That's it for this week on 5 Things to Know for Tokyo 2020. Stay tuned, and we'll be back with more news next week.